That's it, go to sleep. Hey there, good evening everyone. Tonight we're not talking about the usual light stuff, but instead trying to step into the turbulent life of a historical figure, into those moments that truly defined his place in history. When we think of Henry VIII, we often picture the notorious wife killer, the tyrant with 6 marriages. But his decisions during those final weeks of January 1547, well, those might have been the most consequential of all. Tonight, we're going to explore how this larger-than-life monarch spent his very last days, not through the lens of palace gossip or personal drama, but through the weight of history itself. How does a king who reshaped an entire nation face his final curtain call? What last moves does he make on the great chessboard of power? Before we dive in, don't forget to hit that like button if you're enjoying this late-night historical journey, and subscribe if you want more of these gentle explorations through time. Drop a comment letting me know where you're listening from and what time it is there. I love knowing that we're sharing this moment across different corners of the world. Maybe grab a warm drink, dim those lights, perhaps put on some soft background sounds if that helps you unwind. We're going to take this slowly, letting the weight of history settle around us like a comfortable blanket. Alright, let the room get a little darker. Let your breathing slow down, and let's step back into those final days of one of England's most transformative kings. By late January 1547, Henry VIII knew his time was running short. The once athletic monarch who had jousted with the best knights of Europe now struggled to move from room to room in Whitehall Palace. His leg ulcers, probably a consequence of old jousting injuries, had worsened dramatically, and the infection was spreading through his massive frame. Yet even as his body failed him, his mind remained sharp and focused on what mattered most: the survival of the Tudor dynasty and the preservation of his revolutionary changes to England. You have to understand, this wasn't just any king approaching death. This was the man who had torn England away from papal authority, who had dissolved the monasteries and redistributed their vast wealth, who had fundamentally altered the relationship between church and state in ways that would echo through centuries. As January 1547 drew to a close, Henry faced a terrifying prospect. His heir was a 9-year-old boy, Edward, brilliant but utterly unprepared for the complexities of ruling a nation still reeling from religious upheaval. The political architecture Henry had spent nearly 4 decades constructing hung in the balance. Throughout his reign, he had governed through a careful balance of fear, charisma, and calculated alliances with various noble factions. He had elevated men like Thomas Cromwell to unprecedented power, then destroyed them when they became liabilities. He had married and divorced and executed his way through 6 wives, all in service of securing a male heir. Now, with that heir secured, but still a child, Henry faced his greatest challenge: how to ensure his revolutionary changes would survive a regency. In those final weeks, Henry worked with desperate intensity on what would become known as his final will and testament. But this document was far more than a simple distribution of property. It was a masterpiece of political engineering, designed to preserve both the Tudor dynasty and the English Reformation through the vulnerable years ahead. The king who had once declared himself the sole head of the Church of England was now forced to delegate that authority in a way that wouldn't invite chaos. The centerpiece of Henry's final political arrangements was the Regency Council he established to govern during Edward's minority. This wasn't a hasty decision made on his deathbed. Henry had been planning this transition for months, weighing each appointment with the precision of a master strategist. He appointed 16 men to serve as Edward's council, carefully balancing conservatives and reformers, old nobility and new men, ensuring that no single faction could dominate the government. Leading this council was Edward Seymour, Earl of Hertford, Jane Seymour's brother and thus young Edward's uncle. Seymour was a committed Protestant reformer, which aligned with Henry's ultimate religious vision, but he was also pragmatic enough to avoid the kind of radical changes that might provoke rebellion. Alongside Seymour, Henry appointed men like John Dudley, Earl of Warwick, a brilliant military commander who had proven his loyalty through years of service, and Thomas Cranmer, the Archbishop of Canterbury who had been instrumental in England's break with Rome. But Henry's political genius lay not just in who he included, but in how he structured their authority. Rather than appointing a single regent who might accumulate too much power, Henry mandated that major decisions required consensus among the council members. This system was designed to prevent any individual from becoming a second Henry VIII, ruling in young Edward's name while potentially undermining the Tudor legacy. The religious settlement Henry crafted in his final days was equally sophisticated. By 1547, England found itself in a peculiar position, officially Protestant but with many Catholic sympathizers, officially independent from Rome but still uncertain about how far reform should go. Henry's approach was characteristically pragmatic. In his final will, he reaffirmed England's break with papal authority while maintaining many traditional Catholic practices that didn't directly challenge royal supremacy. Henry's last will and testament, finalized just days before his death, included specific provisions about religious policy during Edward's minority. The document mandated that the English Church should continue along the reformed path Henry had established, but it deliberately avoided the more radical Protestant positions that some reformers advocated. This was Henry's attempt to chart a middle course that would prevent the kind of religious civil war that was tearing apart other European nations. The succession arrangements Henry established were perhaps his most crucial legacy. His Third Succession Act of 1544 had already legally established the line of inheritance: Edward first, then Mary, then Elizabeth. But in his final will, Henry went further, detailing exactly how power should transfer and what safeguards should exist during each potential transition. If Edward died without heirs, Mary would become queen, but only if she agreed to respect the religious settlement Henry had established. If Mary died without heirs, Elizabeth would inherit under the same conditions. This succession plan was revolutionary in several ways. First, it placed both of Henry's daughters in the line of succession despite earlier declarations that they were illegitimate. Second, it bound future monarchs to respect the religious and political changes Henry had made, essentially constitutionalizing the English Reformation. Third, it demonstrated Henry's recognition that successful monarchy required more than just royal blood. It required acceptance of the new English system he had created. During those final January days, Henry also made crucial decisions about England's financial future. The dissolution of the monasteries had brought enormous wealth into royal coffers, but much of it had been spent on costly foreign wars and lavish court expenses. Henry's final arrangements included specific provisions for managing the crown's finances during Edward's minority, establishing mechanisms to ensure that England's newfound independence wouldn't be undermined by financial weakness. The king, who had spent much of his reign in conflict with European powers, also used his final days to secure England's international position. He instructed his council to maintain the alliance with the Holy Roman Empire while avoiding entanglement in major continental conflicts. This policy of strategic isolation would allow England to focus on internal consolidation while the rest of Europe exhausted itself in religious wars. Henry's approach to governing during these final weeks revealed the full scope of his political transformation. The young king, who had ascended the throne in 1509 as a Renaissance prince, eager for military glory and international prestige, had evolved into a master of domestic statecraft. His final political arrangements showed a deep understanding of English society and a realistic assessment of what was possible given the constraints he faced. The administrative machinery Henry established in his final days would prove remarkably durable. The Privy Council system he refined would continue to be the center of English government for centuries. The balance between royal authority and conciliar governance he established would influence English constitutional development long after the Tudor dynasty ended. Even the religious settlement he crafted would provide the foundation for the Elizabethan Church that would define English Christianity for generations. As January 1547 entered its final week, Henry VIII had accomplished something remarkable. He had transformed his personal religious and political revolution into a system that could survive without him. The man who had begun his reign as a traditional Catholic monarch devoted to papal authority would end up having created the foundations of modern English governance. His final days weren't spent in regret or nostalgia. but in the practical work of ensuring that his revolutionary changes would outlast their creator. The winter darkness of January 1547 settles deeper around Whitehall Palace as you find yourself in the position of Henry VIII during these crucial final days. You're not just any dying monarch. You're the architect of the most radical religious transformation in English history, and now you must ensure that your spiritual revolution survives your physical departure. The weight of this responsibility presses down on you more heavily than the pain from your infected leg ulcers. You understand better than anyone that the English Reformation you've created exists in a precarious balance. For nearly 2 decades, you've been crafting a unique form of Christianity that breaks from Rome while maintaining much of traditional Catholic doctrine and practice. This wasn't mere political opportunism, though politics certainly played a role. You genuinely believed that the Bishop of Rome had overstepped his authority, that the true church should be governed by rightful kings rather than foreign prelates. But now, as you feel your strength ebbing away in these January days, you face a terrifying prospect. Your 9-year-old son Edward, while brilliant and devoutly Protestant, lacks the authority and experience to defend the religious settlement you've spent decades constructing. Worse still, your daughter Mary remains a committed Catholic who would likely attempt to restore papal authority if she ever came to the throne. The religious future of England hangs in the balance, and only you can tip the scales toward permanent reform. Your approach to securing the Protestant future during these final weeks reveals the sophisticated theological understanding you've developed over 2 decades of religious controversy. You're not content to simply declare England Protestant and hope for the best. Instead, you're working to embed Reformed principles so deeply into English law, custom, and institutional structure that they cannot easily be uprooted. The key document in this religious engineering is your final revision of the Act of 6 Articles, originally passed in 1539 but now being modified in subtle but crucial ways. This legislation had attempted to define English Christianity as a middle path between Roman Catholicism and continental Protestantism. In your final version, you're sharpening the Protestant elements while maintaining enough traditional language to avoid alienating moderate Catholics who might otherwise support a restoration. You've spent considerable time during these last days working with Thomas Cranmer, your Archbishop of Canterbury, to ensure that the English Church's liturgical and theological direction remains clearly Protestant. Cranmer understands your vision perhaps better than anyone, a church that is thoroughly English, decisively anti-papal, but not so radically reformed as to invite rebellion or foreign intervention. Together, you've been refining the theological positions that will guide the church during Edward's minority. The Book of Common Prayer, which Cranmer has been developing under your guidance, represents perhaps your most lasting religious legacy. You're not personally involved in writing prayers or liturgical texts. That's Cranmer's expertise, but you've provided the theological framework that shapes every page. This prayer book will establish English as the language of worship, replacing Latin and symbolically asserting England's independence from Roman linguistic as well as ecclesiastical authority. Your religious vision during these final days extends beyond mere theology to encompass the practical realities of governing a religiously divided nation. You understand that successful religious reform requires more than royal declarations. It requires the cooperation of bishops, local clergy, and ordinary believers. Your final religious arrangements include specific provisions for managing this transition carefully and gradually. One of your most crucial decisions involves the composition of the church hierarchy that will guide England during Edward's minority. You've been careful to appoint bishops who share your reform vision while possessing the administrative skill to implement changes without provoking popular resistance. These men, including Nicholas Ridley, Hugh Latimer, and John Hooper, represent a new generation of English religious leaders who are thoroughly committed to the Protestant cause but sophisticated enough to navigate complex political realities. The university reforms you've been planning also reflect your understanding that lasting religious change requires intellectual foundations. Oxford and Cambridge, once centers of scholastic Catholic theology, must be transformed into institutions that train a new generation of Protestant clergy. Your final educational provisions establish mechanisms for ensuring that English universities produce learned ministers who can articulate and defend Reformed theology against both Catholic criticism and radical Protestant extremism. You're also acutely aware that your religious revolution has created new forms of wealth and power that must be carefully managed. The dissolution of the monasteries wasn't just about rejecting papal authority. It was about redistributing vast resources from an international religious order to English institutions under royal control. Your final arrangements include specific provisions for managing former monastic lands and ensuring that their wealth continues to support Reformed Christianity rather than flowing back to Catholic causes. The international dimension of your religious legacy weighs heavily on your mind during these final days. You understand that England's break with Rome has made it a target for Catholic powers across Europe. The Holy Roman Emperor, the King of France, and the Pope himself all have reasons to desire England's return to papal obedience. Your religious settlement must be robust enough to resist external pressure while flexible enough to adapt to changing circumstances. Your alliance with certain German Protestant princes has been crucial in providing England with Reformed allies. But you've been careful not to align too closely with any particular strain of continental Protestantism. Lutheran theology differs from your own vision in important ways, and Calvinist thought, while influential among some English reformers, goes further than you think wise in rejecting traditional church structure and ceremony. The delicate balance you're trying to maintain becomes clear in your final instructions regarding religious ceremonies and church decoration. You want England to be unmistakably Protestant, but you also understand that too rapid a change in familiar religious practices could provoke popular rebellion. Your final guidelines preserve certain traditional elements: episcopal structure, ceremonial vestments, some feast days, while eliminating anything that might encourage appeals to papal authority. As you contemplate your religious legacy, you're particularly focused on ensuring that the English Bible remains central to Reformed worship. Your authorization of the Great Bible in 1539 was one of your most important religious acts, making Scripture available in English for the first time in many English parishes. Your final religious arrangements include provisions for continuing Bible translation and distribution, recognizing that popular access to Scripture in the vernacular is essential for maintaining Protestant principles. The question of clerical marriage represents another area where your final religious position reflects careful political calculation. You've allowed priests to marry, breaking with centuries of Catholic tradition, but you've done so gradually and with careful attention to public opinion. Your final instructions regarding clerical marriage strike a balance between Reformed principles and practical concerns about social stability. Your personal religious evolution during these final days reveals the complexity of your theological position. You've never been a systematic theologian in the way that Luther or Calvin were, but you've developed a coherent understanding of Christianity that emphasizes royal supremacy, scriptural authority, and English independence while maintaining much traditional doctrine and practice. This unique synthesis represents your attempt to reform the Church without destroying the social and cultural foundations of English Christianity. The provisions you're making for religious education reflect your understanding that lasting reform requires more than institutional change. It requires the formation of a generation of English Christians who understand and embrace Reformed principles. Your final arrangements include specific mechanisms for ensuring that parish clergy receive proper theological training and that ordinary believers have access to Reformed religious instruction. You're also concerned about preventing the kind of radical religious enthusiasm that has torn apart other Reformed communities. Your religious settlement attempts to channel Protestant energy into constructive reform while avoiding the social upheaval that has accompanied religious change in parts of Germany and Switzerland. This requires careful attention to the pace of change and sensitivity to local conditions and traditions. During these final January days, you've been working to ensure that your religious revolution becomes irreversible through legal and institutional mechanisms rather than relying solely on royal authority. The laws you've crafted and the institutions you've established are designed to make any future restoration of papal authority extremely difficult, even if a Catholic monarch should eventually come to the throne. Your final religious testament, embedded within your larger will, represents the culmination of 2 decades of theological and political development. It establishes England as a permanently Protestant nation while providing enough flexibility for future adaptations and refinements. The religious settlement you're creating in these last days will prove remarkably durable, surviving not only Edward's minority but also Mary's Catholic restoration and emerging strengthened under Elizabeth's long reign. The religious legacy you're crafting extends far beyond England itself. Your assertion of royal supremacy over ecclesiastical authority will influence Protestant political thought across Europe and eventually in the New World. The principle that legitimate civil authority takes precedence over foreign religious claims will become a cornerstone of modern state sovereignty, with implications far beyond the immediate religious controversies of the 16th century. The final week of January 1547 brings with it a sense of historical culmination that extends far beyond the walls of Whitehall Palace. Henry VIII, now confined to his chambers but still mentally acute, understands that his approaching death marks not just the end of a reign, but the conclusion of a transformative era in European politics. The king who once sought glory through traditional medieval warfare has instead created something far more lasting. A new model of sovereign independence that will reshape the international order for centuries to come. You find yourself in these final days contemplating the extraordinary diplomatic revolution you've engineered over nearly 4 decades of rule. When you ascended the throne in 1509, Europe was still organized around medieval concepts of universal authority, the Holy Roman Empire claiming temporal supremacy, the Catholic Church asserting spiritual dominion over all Christian princes. Your systematic dismantling of these claims, initially motivated by your marriage difficulties, has evolved into a comprehensive rejection of external authority over English affairs. The international implications of your reign become clearer with each passing day as you review the diplomatic correspondence flowing into Whitehall. European chancelleries are already calculating how England's position will change under a child king, but they fundamentally misunderstand what you've accomplished. Your diplomatic legacy isn't simply about alliances and treaties. It's about establishing England as a fully sovereign state answerable to no external authority, whether papal or imperial. Your approach to foreign relations during these final days reveals the sophisticated understanding of international law and sovereignty you've developed. The various treaties you've negotiated with France, the Holy Roman Empire, and other European powers haven't just secured temporary advantages. They've established precedents for how sovereign states interact as equals. Your consistent refusal to acknowledge any superior temporal authority has forced other European rulers to treat England as a genuinely independent power, not merely a peripheral kingdom. The economic dimensions of your foreign policy legacy are particularly evident as you review England's trade relationships during these final weeks. Your break with Rome didn't just free England from papal taxation. It opened new possibilities for commercial relationships unencumbered by religious considerations. English merchants now trade freely with Protestant German cities, negotiate directly with Ottoman officials, and explore commercial opportunities that would have been impossible under papal oversight. Your naval innovations represent perhaps the most visible aspect of your international legacy. The Royal Navy you've created isn't just a collection of warships. It's the foundation of England's future global influence. The shipbuilding programs you've initiated, the harbor improvements you've ordered, and the maritime expertise you've cultivated will enable your successors to project English power across the world's oceans in ways that would have been unimaginable when you took the throne. During these final January days, you've been particularly focused on ensuring that England's independence remains secure during Edward's minority. The instructions you're leaving for your Regency Council include detailed provisions for maintaining diplomatic autonomy, while avoiding entanglement in European conflicts that don't serve English interests. This policy of strategic detachment will prove crucial as religious wars devastate the continent in the coming decades. Your relationship with Scotland during these final weeks reflects your understanding that English security requires more than just defensive measures. The rough-wooing campaigns you've conducted against Scotland haven't achieved immediate union, but they've demonstrated English military capability and established the principle that England won't tolerate Scottish interference in English affairs. Your final instructions regarding Scotland emphasize continued pressure for union while avoiding the kind of costly military commitments that might drain English resources. The intelligence networks you've established across Europe represent another crucial element of your international legacy. The system of English agents, merchants, and diplomatic observers you've created provides information about European political developments that enables England to respond effectively to threats and opportunities. Your final arrangements ensure that these intelligence capabilities will continue during Edward's minority, giving England significant advantages in international negotiations. You understand that your most important international legacy lies not in any particular alliance or treaty, but in the precedent you've established for sovereign independence. Your assertion that legitimate monarchy answers only to God and the people has implications that extend far beyond England's immediate circumstances. This principle will influence political development across Europe and eventually in the New World, contributing to the eventual emergence of the modern state system. The religious dimension of your international position continues to evolve during these final days. While you've aligned England with Protestant powers when convenient, you've consistently avoided binding England to any particular theological position that might limit diplomatic flexibility. Your unique religious settlement allows England to negotiate with Catholic powers when advantageous while maintaining solidarity with Protestant allies when necessary. Your approach to international law during these final weeks reveals the sophistication of your legal thinking. The various precedents you've established regarding royal supremacy, parliamentary authority, and national sovereignty have created a body of constitutional principles that other nations are beginning to study and, in some cases, emulate. English legal scholars are already receiving inquiries from foreign courts seeking to understand how England has successfully asserted its independence from both papal and imperial authority. The commercial treaties you've negotiated during your reign have established England as a significant player in European trade networks. Your final economic arrangements include provisions for expanding these commercial relationships while protecting English merchants from foreign interference. The trading companies you've chartered and the commercial privileges you've negotiated will provide the foundation for England's future economic expansion. During these last days, you've also been considering England's relationship with the emerging Portuguese and Spanish colonial empires. While England has been largely excluded from New World opportunities due to papal grants to Catholic powers, your assertion of English sovereignty creates possibilities for future colonial expansion that aren't dependent on papal authorization. Your final instructions hint at the global ambitions that your successors will eventually pursue. The military reforms you've implemented represent another crucial aspect of your international legacy. The professional army you've created, with its modern artillery and disciplined infantry, has demonstrated that England can compete militarily with any European power. Your final military arrangements ensure that these capabilities will be maintained and improved during Edward's minority, providing England with the means to defend its independence against any foreign threat. Your diplomatic correspondence during these final weeks includes exchanges with rulers across Europe who are seeking to understand how the coming transition will affect their relationships with England. Your responses consistently emphasize that English foreign policy will continue to be based on national interest rather than external obligations. This principle of diplomatic independence will prove crucial as England navigates the complex international situation of the coming decades. The educational reforms you've supported have international implications that you're only beginning to understand. The scholars you've attracted to English universities bring knowledge and perspectives from across Europe, creating intellectual networks that enhance England's international influence. Your final educational provisions ensure that England will continue to participate in European intellectual developments while maintaining its political independence. As you contemplate your international legacy during these final January days, you recognize that you've fundamentally altered England's relationship with the rest of Europe. The kingdom that once sought validation from papal and imperial authorities has become a sovereign power that other nations must take seriously. Your assertion of English independence has created precedents that will influence international relations for centuries to come. Your economic policies have also positioned England for future prosperity in ways that extend far beyond immediate fiscal concerns. The wealth you've redistributed from monastic institutions, the commercial opportunities you've created, and the financial independence you've established provide the foundation for England's eventual emergence as a global economic power. Your final economic arrangements ensure that these advantages will be preserved and enhanced during the coming regency. The legal precedents you've established regarding royal supremacy and parliamentary authority have created a unique form of constitutional monarchy that other European rulers are studying with considerable interest. Your final constitutional arrangements demonstrate that effective governance doesn't require subservience to external authorities, whether religious or secular. This principle will prove influential in the development of modern democratic institutions. Your approach to international relations during these final days reflects a sophisticated understanding of how power operates in the emerging modern state system. Your consistent emphasis on sovereignty, independence, and national interest has positioned England to take advantage of opportunities that will emerge as the traditional medieval order continues to break down across Europe. The diplomatic institutions you've created will prove remarkably durable, surviving not only the immediate transition to Edward's reign but also the various political crises that will challenge England in the coming centuries. Your emphasis on professional diplomacy, accurate intelligence, and careful negotiation has established standards that will guide English foreign policy for generations. As January 1547 draws to its close, you can see with remarkable clarity how your reign has positioned England for future greatness. The sovereign independence you've asserted, the institutions you've created, and the precedents you've established provide the foundation for England's eventual emergence as a global power. Your international legacy extends far beyond the immediate circumstances of your reign, influencing the development of the modern international system in ways that will echo across centuries. The diplomatic revolution you've engineered represents perhaps your most enduring contribution to world history. The principle that legitimate sovereignty recognizes no external superior has implications that extend far beyond England's immediate circumstances, influencing political development across Europe and eventually around the world. Your assertion of English independence has helped create the intellectual foundation for the modern system of sovereign nation-states that will eventually emerge from the ruins of medieval universalism. And now, as the last flickering candles cast their gentle glow across the palace chambers, as the winter winds of 1547 whisper through the corridors of power, the great transformation draws quietly to its close. The boy king who once dreamed of knightly glory has become the architect of a new age, his personal struggles with Rome having unleashed forces that will reshape not just England, but the very nature of sovereignty itself. The historical echoes begin to soften now, like distant thunder rolling away across the countryside. In these final moments, there's a sense of completion, of purposes fulfilled and destinies realized. The crown passes on, but the principles endure. The man fades into memory, but the precedents live on. England awakens to a new dawn, forever changed by the extraordinary journey of one king who dared to say no to the world's most powerful institutions and, in doing so, created something entirely new under the winter sky. Sleep now, knowing that from these turbulent decades emerged foundations that would support centuries of English achievement. The political architecture built in those final January days of 1547 would prove more enduring than any castle, more influential than any army, more lasting than the king who created it. In the gentle darkness of historical memory, the sounds of that distant world gradually fade, leaving only the peaceful awareness that from great struggles can come great legacies, from personal crises can emerge universal principles, and from one king's defiance can spring a nation's eternal independence.